welcome to the Bates College Museum of Art podcast. My name is Morgan Hough. I'm the Assistant Education Curator of Academic and Outreach Programming. And my voice does not sound like Peter's. This is a new phase of the museum podcast. I've been lovingly nicknamed New Peter for the first few weeks. And I'm joined today with Anthony Shostak.
Shostak.
Okay. And he's the education curator here at the museum, and Eda Cufer, who is a visiting artist. Do you want to introduce yourself?
So Eda, please tell us a little bit about your background.
My background, yes. I'm coming from Slovenia, a very small and relatively very new country that before 1981 belonged to larger country that we now call former Yugoslavia. I trained as a dramaturge, which is probably not something that a lot of Americans know what it is about. It is mostly a profession that is dedicated to study of the composition and principle of a play or a theatrical art. In a contemporary world that would be a performing arts studies. I worked as a dramaturg and I was luckily living through an interesting historic period of the 1980s in former Yugoslavia when once socialist country started looking for the ways to democratize its society, and in that very particular historic atmosphere, arts play an important role. So I was lucky enough to find a lot of interesting people that share sensibility and creative ideas among each other, and so we formed an ad hoc theater group already in 1983 that later became part of a larger art collective called NSK, or we named it with the German name Neue Slowenische Kunst. Last time in my conversation I explained why it could never be translated to New Slovenian art, or in Slovenian that would be Nova Slovenska umetnost. And I think that's a little bit too long theme for this for the podcast. So maybe I'll give a word.
So you were here in Maine. We brought you in to talk with one of our professors, Marina Filipovic. You had a discussion last night, but this is not your first time in Maine. You're no stranger to the state.
I'm no stranger to the state. I'm American citizen, besides Slovenian citizen, and I'm also NSK citizen, because the art collective that I mentioned created its own independent state in time, state without territories, and we are issuing passports. So actually I have a passport number 1 because we started by alphabetical order, and my passport, because my name started with C, was the first one. Mm-hmm. So yesterday in the class with the professor Erin Nolan, I showed all 3 passports to her students in a very interesting class about art and migration, and we had a really interesting discussion on the nature, function, meaning of passports in general in our culture. So,
wow, that is pretty cool.
That's amazing.
Do you use now? Which passport do you use to fly?
I actually flew here with Lufthansa, and they instructed me because of the data I have to fill in that I have to use my American passport if I have. Mm-hmm. Dual citizenship, and when I came to the border and showed my American passport, the officer asked me if I have another passport, and I said yes, and I said, is it Slovenian? And I said yes, and I said, can you show it to me? So this is just a sign of how much we cannot hide anything
Yeah.
Wow.
in today's world,
Yeah.
world. So who knows what would happen if I would show my NSK passport? I probably wouldn't do that. Some people sometimes use it, but not to cross the borders from Europe to United States, probably.
Right. You probably don't want to introduce the opportunity for an event.
Yeah, for mixing art with terrorism or something like that.
Right. Or being suspected of that anyway. Interesting. Do you have a question?
I do. Yeah. So, would you be able to talk a little bit about your teaching practice, sort of your philosophy surrounding that? How does art and theater enrich your teaching practice, and maybe just a little overview of your educational career as well?
Yeah, I actually now realize when you asked me this that I didn't answer Anthony's question before. So
It's okay.
I have American passport because I was married for 18 years to American man.
Mm-hmm.
His name is Roger Conover, and I used to live in Maine. And I was teaching at Maine College of Art for probably 13, 15 years in the Department for Art History and Liberal Arts. The course that I was teaching and that I liked very much was critical approaches to contemporary art. I would say my field of expertise in teaching would be art history after 1950, which is which considers very different kind of art that is very mixed with the interpretative models and theory, and also cultural history. So I'm now teaching at the Academy of Visual Arts in Ljubljana and the Liberal Arts School in Nova Gorica, also courses from contemporary art history, performing arts, cultural history of Slovenia, for example, stuff like that.
Amazing. So you mentioned you're an art historian. Do you have a favorite project, a favorite art piece or publication of yours or anybody else's?
I'm actually not art historian, but dramaturge. And what I like about the art about after 1950 is precisely interdisciplinarity, that we can switch from one role in arts in the other. I'm very I like conceptual art a lot, and one of my favorite book and also art critic or art historian or curator is Lucy Lippert, which I had luck to meet, and her book 6 Years, which is an amazing project covering almost everything that happened in conceptual art worldwide. You can find like the Slovenian conceptual art group OHO, OHO, in her book. Like how did she manage to collect all this information at that time? So and she had a house in Maine.
Really?
Yeah, that she inherited from her parents, and she comes every summer.
I didn't know that.
I used to meet her several times, and she's very, very pleasant person.
So, sort of circling back to Maine, now that you mention it. So, can you talk a little bit about how you sort of ended up here in Maine?
My husband lives in Maine, so I just joined him.
Got it.
I didn't come for work. I found work at Maine College of Art, so come for love.
Yes.
Maine is for lovers.
Maine is for lovers. Yeah, we're adopting the Virginia slogan. We're ditching vacation land.
Right.
Yeah. So NSK, which is the collective group that we have on display in our lower gallery right now in our Synergy space. Can you talk a little bit about maybe what you think is your favorite or most successful aspect of NSK's work?
I think it's the impact that art, if the project is successful, has on audience or had on an audience in a very particular time and context in the 1980s, where this practice started developing itself into some kind of rational strategy that can be used and applied more widely. That's my most, for me, the most interesting aspect. But it's last night, if you remember being at the conversation, Anthony, I know, was there. It needs to be explained. It needs to be showed with visuals. It's something that I have very hard time to define in short.
Right.
Like maybe I could tell you just from my dramaturgic practice. Like in dramaturgy, you have two most common way of how artwork should impact a spectator. One is Aristotelian, the through identification. Most of the traditional art has this identifying moment. You just get immersed with the artwork. You just identify with the characters. You suffer with the character on the stage. You hate the villain and so on. And then you have Brechtian or anti-Aristotelian. You can even find a way back to Plato. Plato hated art, which is against identification, which is against basically being, completely without distance to the story or film you watch, but where you use art in order to provoke some kind of shortcut to wake the spectator up, to start thinking about the world, critically examining the processing going on around, and stuff like that. So I think NSK had that second capacity.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
yeah. Sort of leads me into my next question for you. So how do you see, I guess, what we might call the legacy of NSK? Is that evolving? Has audience reaction and interpretation changed as time has moved forward and as history has moved forward?
This is Laibach was founded in 1980, so that's 44 years ago. So, like the whole idea of issuing passports, was based on the idea of creating some kind of community, and there is actually a community of artists who are practicing some a strategy similar to NSK. They name themselves NSK folk artists, and there is also a lot of philosophers, theoreticians, professors that has nothing that have their own website. They are not in contact with the nuclear NSK people. Somebody asked me in the class, when was the last field project I did? It was 97.
Wow.
So it was long ago.
Right.
I mostly now write, speak, or my job is teaching. This is not something that is very alive right now. But Marina Filipovic showed me a YouTube video where this NSK folk artist published a book. I will not remember. Weapon of mass instruction is called, instead of mass destruction. And they had the Zoom presentation that is available through YouTube. And I was watching that and was really fascinated. I know some of them, because there were very quickly in the 1990s, the NSK work caused the interest of a lot of scholars. There was a British scholar Alexi Monroe, who wrote an interesting book, Interrogation Machine, then German scholar Inke Ahrens, and so on. So I realized at this panel there were mostly professors of art and politics from Germany, Great Britain, France, and stuff like that. And to tell you now how is now NSK considered, there was a British professor, Bernadette, I forgot her last name. She said that she has some students that are coming from former Yugoslavia and Balkans, and they consider NSK as some kind of grandparents of something,
Wow.
It's something a little bit far back, but still important and present in some way. So, yeah.
That's amazing. Um, so I'm also interested in sort of how you might classify NSK in the canon of art history. One thing that I studied a lot during my undergraduate career was institutional critique, and we sort of got into Leibach a little bit, just like on the fringe of Leibach.
Very easy. Institutional critique and appropriation art. That's where NSK fit within the Western canon.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and in that sense, my teaching contemporary art at Mecca was very instructive and important for me, because it gave me a chance to explore the American conceptual art and especially institutional critique artists and appropriation artists, New York scene in the 1980s, and there is tons of similarities.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not on the surface, but in the strategies.
So can you tell our audience a little bit about institutional critique and about appropriation art, sort of like an overview if they're not super familiar with it, just so that they can get a better understanding of how NSK operated?
Yes, with institutional critique, like it started, I don't know, with Hans Hake, and I always can't have it's a very important artist that I cannot remember his name, but right now it will maybe come. Then Andrea Fraser, I don't know. It's a lot of conceptual artists that were basically started questioning through the legacy of Duchamp, by the and the sudden importance that art system has, in presenting art, something that Marcel Duchamp was the first to point that, you can, whatever you put in the museum could be considered artwork, So what about that, So there is this whole line of important artists from the second part of the 20th century that are starting to pointing to the role of the museum in the way art is presented and delivered to the audience. And with the appropriation art, it's also, I think you can say that pop art and Warhol is the beginning of that. We live 20th century of film and photography, advertising industry. These are the powerful visual means that are influencing our thinking, our choices, our identities, and so on. So by the idea of appropriation art is that, using the strategy of the mass culture, but changing the context of it, you might produce this kind of alienation, Verfremdung, Brechtian, effect, to start understanding that, so many things from the society, from the, what capitalism and also government used to shape you in a way they desire you to be, and, the question that each of us should ask for itself is who I am, How is it, how much is it left from me? For example, an interesting artist that's very comparable to Leibach adaptation, appropriation of this military look would be the Cindy Sherman. How are they called? Film pics or when she was actually in her studio designing herself and then photographing himself to look like a character from a movie. So these are the kind of strategies, and sometimes when you look at that, it has an uncanny effect on you, because she was exploring herself through making herself somebody else, like. I will remember or not, but I tend to forget these names that are constantly in my mind very often.
Thank you. That was an incredible overview of some really important elements of institutional critique and appropriation that I think are like very sort of quintessential parts of NSK and of some very familiar American artists. Anthony, do you have any questions?
Yeah. So, we have every year here at Bates, we have a crop of students who are studying studio art, producing a unified body of work as part of their thesis project. What advice would you have from your career in working in critical theory and as a dramaturge? What advice would you have for somebody who is kind of searching for this project to immerse themselves in for and begin to discover maybe who they are as an artist?
That's tough question. I would definitely say that art, good art, comes from, it doesn't come from the lonely wolf. It usually comes from the rich environment. When people started gathering together, share the ideas, that's true for conceptual artists, it's true for abstract expressionists, for example, or any avant-garde. And it comes from rich environment, in terms of art, philosophy, even science. So look for that environment and, try to align with that, because the rich environment will bring that, what is most potent and creative in you out. That's my advice. It's probably not a recipe, but and I think those environments are unfortunately harder and harder to find, in a way. So,
right. Well, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.